So we are going to zoom right into panel 1, titled Decolonization, Archives in the Digital. And I'm going to briefly introduce the moderator for that panel, who is Ademide Adelusi. I will put their bio in the chat for us. And I will read it for us as well. So trained as both a historian and computer engineer, Ademide Adelusi's research into the history of West African cities combines a set of interdisciplinary interests in women, cartography, and digital humanities. Her forthcoming book, Imagine Lagos, explores the city's 19th century history, rebuilding its past as a series of encounters between men and women, between the past and present, enslaved and free, Echo the Old Town, and Lagos, and between the land and lagoons. Her research has been funded by the Andrew Mellon, Woodrow Wilson, and Hellman Foundations. She teaches classes on Africa and urban history, digital storytelling and maps at UC Riverside, where she's an assistant professor of history. And she received her PhD in history from NYU in 2016. So if we could just welcome Dr. Ademide Adelusi to moderate our next panel.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you, Kwabena, for that really lovely introduction. So we're just going to jump right into panel 1, which is Decolonization, Archives, and the Digital. So we're going to run from about 11:15 to 12:30 Central Time. I'm going to introduce each speaker before they present their work. And I would ask, and we're going to go in the order of the schedule, and I would ask that everyone save their questions till the end. So thank you. First, we have Judith Opoku-Boateng. As head archivist of the J.H. Kwabena and Nketia archives at the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana, Judith oversees an audiovisual heritage preservation program, which supports both academic research and creative engagement. She holds formal qualifications in sociology and archival studies, respectively, from the University of Ghana. Beyond the university, Judith has served as a private consultant for the local and international organizations, including Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative and ICCROM, where she also functioned as a resource person and local organizing chair for ICCROM's SOIMA program in July 2017. Judith is a US state alumni in the International Visitor Leadership Program from 2011. She currently serves as a vice president for communications for International Association for Sound and Audiovisual Archives, the IASA, as well as its ambassador for Ghana and West Africa. She also serves on the advisory board of the industry program, Preservation of Africa's Audiovisual Media Assets. Additionally, Judith serves on the National Committee of the Memory of the World program in Ghana, which is a UNESCO initiative. She is published in peer-reviewed journals and continues to advocate for the care of audiovisual heritage materials in her region through various initiatives. Welcome, Judith, and we look forward to hearing from you. You have about 12 minutes.
Thank you very much. Ademide, right?
Ademide.
Ademide, okay. All right. Thank you. Do I go straight away to talk? Okay. All right. Thank you. So honestly, listening to Professor Ropika, I just want to divide my talk into two. Honestly, I wanted to just introduce participants to the J.H. Kwabena Nketia archives, but listening to her and some of the issues she raised with regards to the global, non-global South issues in relation to the topic under discussion. I just want to share some perspectives I shared with the conference in Amsterdam recently. So first of all, let me quickly just take you on a tour of the J.H. Kwabena Nketia archives, and then I will just go briefly to share some of the perspectives I shared with the other conference. So thank you so much, Professor Iku and Professor Rosenberg and all the organizers for getting me on board. I really appreciate my involvement. Thank you. So let me just share my screen. Is it okay?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, all right. So as mentioned by the Professor Ademide, right? I manage the Kwabena Nketia archives, which is an archive which is operated within the University of Ghana. And it is one of the academic research units of the University of Ghana at the Institute of African Studies. And it contributes to the teaching, learning, and research activities of the Institute of African Studies. This archive is actually engaged with preserving Ghana's cultural histories and traditional musical practices. And it provides a valuable resource for local students and scholars and creates a site in which broader conversations about the country's cultural legacies and socio-political discourse. So, so this is a picture. I'm just taking you on a quick run of the institute, and since we are talking digital humanities, let me just take you on a pictorial tour of the institutes and the archives. So, the archive was named in honor of Professor Nketia in 2015, and it is the realization of over 6 decades of gathering audio and visual data, acquiring new collections, research. And then the core collection was amassed by Nketia during his extensive career, shaping Ghana's political, cultural policy, building, teaching, and research institutions, and then studying music, culture, and language in Africa. So in order to reverse the effects of hegemony and decolonize archival methodology, Nketia exerted efforts in strengthening collaboration between the archive and indigenous communities. His quest for decolonization is clearly evident in his expedition and his choice and the kind of data he collected for the Institute's archive. And his convocation speak of 1963, which is actually a guiding principle in this archive, stamps this colonization view. And he states, for the sake of time, I just quickly read, he said, African traditional arts should be recorded. This was actually captured in his speech in 1963. He said, African traditional arts should be recorded, they should be preserved, they should be studied. And they should not merely be recorded, studied, but practiced as living arts. According to him, he believes that the art must develop and that the study of African traditions should inspire creative experiments in the African idiom. And this was Nketia who said, so this actually has been our guide, in this archive. And this quote reflects Nketia's dedication to documenting and preserving African performing arts as part of the decolonization of higher education and knowledge production in Africa, as well as Ghana's efforts in nation building. So this is a picture of how the archive started in the early 1950s when he started, collecting the materials. So this is a repository of the Nketia archives. And some few years ago, before he passed, we used to have him come to the archive and even add onto the metadata, that we had, because he collected much of the collections, especially the core of the materials from the 1950s to the 1970s. And this is a picture of the archive where students are invited to come, students, scholars, and anybody doing studies or research in African studies and related disciplines are invited to come to the archive for free. We have spaces where we still invite people to be interviewed, and then materials are still transcribed and made available, to students. In terms of what we have recordings of high life, hip life, traditional indigenous songs, his oral histories, interviews of prominent people in Ghana, and quite a lot, about Ghana's history. And again, we have some very rare materials called Arabic manuscripts, which was also research that was done in 1963, which is also in the archive. We have working papers of old and retired professors, and we still actually receive materials from, researchers and people who have died. Their families bring materials to us. We keep ephemeral collections of like funeral brochures, very rare photographs and all that. And sometimes people ask, why do you collect materials of funeral brochures? And we said it's good to archive the dead, so all these are materials we keep. Again, we keep interesting materials on photographs, and all that. This just to give you an idea of the sound and the image media we have. From audio, we have from quarter-inch open reels to, even currently born digital materials. And for the image media, we have from 60mm film reels to, photographic and negatives. And these are also photos to let you see how we have materials spread out on vinyls and all that. In terms of who we serve the academic community, the UG in general, that's the University of Ghana in general, second cycle institution. We again do community outreach to traditional authorities, and even record creators, people who created the records. We have families coming to the archive to actually request for some of the materials, just to remember some of the performers who have already passed. And then we also engage with the international community, are linked with archives and all that. So we get visiting scholars, students, and all that come through the archive to see the kind of work we do. We use the archive, as a model to train students within the university, and then even second cycle institutions. The archive is linked to the Institute of African Studies audiovisual lab, where the staff go to the field to still document materials, because we still have, as you all know, we still have a living heritage in Ghana. So all the staff, together with the fellows of the institute, still document materials and bring to the archive. For some time now, the archive has been involved in what we say archival activism, right? And through this, we've engaged in workshops, training, using the space as training centers for cleaning tape splicing, some of the very some of the physical activity, especially when it comes to working with the objects, not the digital files, as we're talking about, right? So from the magnetic tapes, even down to born digital materials, sometimes you use the archive facilities, to train people. And again, we've also been involved in organizing international conferences on archives. We recently did the 2018 International Association of Sound and Individual Archives Conference, and we did the archive was again engaged in the 2019-2021, which was just last year's only. It was virtual, and recently we were engaged in the Heritage Photo Lab project, where we sourced photos from individuals and institutions, photos from the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and it was actually sponsored by the Goethe Institute and Institut Français. And we gathered all these photos in the archive, and then we cleaned, scanned, and then made them available, through an exhibition, to the public, which was mounted for about 3 months or so. And all young people, old people, and people from, all ages were able to know exactly how Ghana looked like in terms of fashion, in terms of our livelihoods and all that, through the exhibition. Again, we've been involved in other exhibitions where this man who captured the whole of, he's called Fantagbo, he captured the whole of Keta in photos. And we managed to get in touch with the family, and then we scanned, digitized, but the family mounted the exhibition. But then we did the basic archival work, to mount the exhibition. Unfortunately, the man passed, I think just about a month ago after the exhibition. At least I'm sure he was very well satisfied, and his spirit said, "Okay, I'm ready to go because I'm done with what I had to do." So, and again, we are also involved in the Gerald Annan Forson's project, which is, he was the former president of Ghana, Jerry John Rawlings. He captured Rawlings in photos. So he followed Rawlings all through the revolution, through up to now. And actually this project is, I always want to applaud the person who led us to Gerald, that is Professor Jesse Shipley from Dartmouth College. So we're doing this, in collaboration, with Dartmouth College through Jesse Shipley. And we managed to also do an exhibition in Sharjah, near Dubai, on Ghana's revolution, in Dubai. And then again, one other thing that we also doing is to try to, create some kind of intimacy with the heritage collectors. So recently we put Kwame Nkrumah's photographer, cinematographer, Reverend Chris Hesse, and Gerald Annan Forsson. We just put them together, just talk, and then we record whatever they say. And I mean, the amount of data we collected from these conversations is amazing, So I just want to quickly, I just want to end, and then just to assure us that we still, as I said, we still have like a living heritage, and just as the archive still records, I know that we haven't really gotten close to the digital humanities thing that's we've been talking about. And as my colleague also, made a comment, Kokululai made a comment about the fact that we are not actually just close there. I feel there's more to be done, and within the local institutions that actually produce all these contents. But to end my presentation, how much time do I have?
Thank you, Judith. I sent you a message. You're about 12 minutes now, so you should please wrap up. Thank you.
So I should wrap up. Okay, all right. So is it possible to just speak for just one more minute? Or
sure, you can have another minute, so then we'll move on. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Let me just end the slide there.
Oh, do you not need the minute?
Come again?
That's fine. Well, thank you so much, Judith. Are you done?
No, I just wanted to share some few perspectives about the, but I think we don't have time. Maybe I'll have to just do it at another time. The time I'm quite quick. So I just wanted to share some, perspectives on the global south, like for the visual archives and the digital space, some kind of a perspective. But I think we don't have much time. So let me just end here. Maybe during the Q&A, I might come in with those kinds of thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Judith, for really sharing this wonderful archive with us. We look forward to, of course, you expanding more in the Q&A, but we want to make sure everyone is able to have their full presentation. Thank you so much. Next, we have Etim Eyoh from the Nigerian Nostalgia Project, and his talk is titled Using Social Media to Recover Nigerian History. Etim Eyoh is the founder of the Nigeria Nostalgia Project. Since 2010, the project's major activity has been centered around collecting, sharing, and creating conversations around photo, video, and other document formats from as far back as availability will allow. This activity is supported on a variety of social media platforms where he, together with other site administrators, manage and moderate discussions between scholars, students, thinkers, observers, commentators, and general enthusiasts. From there, they synthesize those conversations into historical data that for the first time comes from our perspective. The project engages a growing community of over 100,000 participants and a record of over 40,000 documents, Welcome, Eyoh, and we look forward to your presentation. I will be giving you messages, sending you messages in the chat when you're almost out of time.
Oh, okay. Thank you everyone for, thank you to James Yeku for inviting me. It feels great to be here, but amongst lots of academic, highly esteemed academic folk. I'm not an academic, so you'll have to bear with my lay presentation of the limitations of social media when it comes to recording Nigerian history, which is going to be, and I'll share my screen quickly if I can find that presentation. Slideshow. I don't have a very long presentation. I'm just going to talk about, oops, it's gone crazy already. Not good. Okay, all right. Go back to the beginning. There we are. Okay, the limitations of using social media to recover Nigerian history. We spent the last at the Nigerian Nostalgia Project. We spent the last 12 years collecting, categorizing, reformatting, and redistributing Nigerian history, identity, experience, and culture information. I guess what I want to, I mean, I've heard all the conversations, that the discussions that have happened prior to this, and I don't want to bore you with repetitions, because some of what was discussed before is also relevant to what we're doing here. But I will try to focus my talk, exclusively on social media and what social media really represents. Social media gives us a huge opportunity to do things to be able to collect data, to be able to categorize this data, reformat data, and distribute data very effectively. But there are some limitations. But before I go into that, I'll talk about the Nigerian Nostalgia Project, just to give everybody some better perspective on the Nostalgia Project. You can see on the screen that what our mission is. Our mission is really to collect, reach, and empower all people with African legacy information, and to tell stories that connect African thought, personalities, and events to the global community. So we want to connect not just Nigerians to the information that we're collecting right now. We will expand and begin to collect information from broader African diaspora communities and African continental communities as well, because we want to aggregate a lot of that information. And we look to partnering with several organizations who are doing similar things in different African spaces to whatever that grand crescendo will be, the way that we visualize it. We've collected over 200,000 photographs and documents in the past 12 years. We have about 150,000 strong community across different social media platforms. There are thousands of historical accounts. We've built a research cohort, not an academic one, but something that is a layman's research cohort, and a cohort of creatives as well, because we rely on creators to tell stories. And so that's essentially what the Nigerian Nostalgia Project has been. What social media offers us really is, at a functional level, low cost, high functionality, storage, and interactive tools. Those are all things. And those things, if you look at this on the left side of your screen there, those functional tools fit into each of these boxes, which are essentially processes which the Nigerian Nostalgia Project follows towards its final output, or its intended output. So we collect, we categorize, we reformat, and we distribute, and that's how we've kind of documented, and that's our process, if you like. And the second thing that social media does for us, essentially, is it allows us to build community. And I think that you all are familiar with that already. We have, building community is so important for us. With on our social media platforms, for example, we tend to use different platforms for different purposes. For example, Facebook would be used in our collection processes when we collect, because the functions within Facebook allow people to share photographs, to caption them, to share video, different types of formats, video, photographs, documents, etc. So that is really where we concentrate a lot of the the collection from. And then we use other platforms to categorize information. We also do some categorizations on Facebook. We do some categorizations in other platforms like Tumblr and Instagram and on Twitter. But those kinds of categorizations are much more limited to what the functionality of those platforms are. And I guess I can ask questions about that later on if any of those come up. A lot of our reformatting work really is about us taking the conversations that we have on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and the associated photographs or documents or videos or any digital documents, and turning those into alternative formats, like maybe a short documentary, which we will then share on social media, which is really the format that we're going for. And those could be micro documentaries, those could be full feature documentaries. They could be anything which we know that our audiences are prepared to consume. And there's also the distribution portion of it as well. We distribute this through our own streaming platform, and also on the different social media platforms that exist out there. We also use social media for marketing. Marketing is a very important component of our distribution process. So that also happens. So social media also supports that function. So you can see that everything from collecting, categorizing, reformatting, distributing the data that we've collected, or the data that we collect, and marketing that data to our audiences can happen with relative ease and at relatively low cost within the social media framework. And what I want to stress actually is that this is so important for us, because what we're trying to do, we found that it's very important for us to be able to reach people, and ordinary people, with this information. Unlike maybe a typical academic environment where people who are not academically inclined don't necessarily go or don't necessarily have access to. We want to be that project that is able to bring qualitative information, qualitative data to people who to lay people who consume it on a daily basis without actually thinking about it as history or an academic exercise. The limitations of I think I missed a slide, so we'll go back. Yeah, here we go. We do that? Yes, we did. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so the limitations of social media. Now, there are some limitations. There are very serious limitations. Social media, social media is limited, is a generational thing. And so on the screen, you can see some references to, old social media sites that are now no longer functioning: MySpace, Vine, Yahoo groups. This is something that is very dangerous, I guess, about social media and keeping information that is valuable, such as we have collected within these social media platforms. So, because existing users of social media platforms can become disenchanted with one platform or the other. Existing users may also outgrow the site because their lifestyle, life circumstances change, and they're not so much on social media on one platform or the other. I know that my son, for example, won't go on Facebook, even though he has a Facebook account, but won't go on there. New users also may not be signing up to particular platforms, say like Facebook, TikTok. These are all different things that attract different generations. And if all your data is stuck on one platform, what happens is that once that platform becomes obsolete or is no longer the trend, that means that your data is somewhat in jeopardy. And so you have to think about that as you are using social media platforms on a very regular basis, about how to transmit your data either to a proprietary environment, which is what I suppose a lot of the focus of this kind of humanities conference is doing, or you have to diversify and think about how to present the same data that you have on multiple platforms: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, or Snapchat, whatever, what have you, and try to make it work that way. And I think that, but there'll be more questions about that, I'm quite sure. So the last thing is that also the second thing that is that limitation that I think is data security and control. Once your data is on social media platforms, of course, the question is, to whom does the data belong? Who does it belong to? How do you manage that process? And what are the solutions? We, as the Nigerian Nostalgia Project, for example, have had to begin building and getting into the kinds of things that you were talking, that some of the speakers were talking about earlier, about archiving and thinking about how to present our data, and how to archive our data and present it to our public. We've started that process. Of course, we've encountered a lot of the difficulties and problems that you have, that have been highlighted already. And we're looking at ways to get around those. And we're thinking, and some of this, an example of some of the ways that we're thinking about this is that really taking these as, individual, primary records. If we say a primary record is maybe a photograph, a primary record is maybe a document, a primary record is a story. So we found that a lot of our audience, we've had to think about what are our audiences responding to, because they're all researchers of a sort. They're not academic researchers, but they're casual researchers, maybe investigative journalists or something. They're looking for one fact, one record, one item or the other. So the question becomes, how do we create records that can go into a database that, and how is that going to be managed and manipulated and presented to those audiences. And we're kind of settling down onto certain kinds of things, which is ideally stories and very short anecdotal stories. Whether this works for an academic environment, I don't know, but I think that within those stories there will be an ability to dig deeper, or to go, to become to develop into a much more complex, I guess the word is algorithms, or much more complex data connections as over time, but to start with really the simple stuff, and one thing, one story, one photo, one this, and how that connects to a whole bunch of other things. And that helps us to make it presentable to people who are not looking to get into huge academic exercise. Let's see. And I think that's where I will stop. I know that there will be questions later on, and I think that then I could go into greater detail about what we've done. I hope I've done my 12 minutes today. And it's nice to see you again, Dr. Ademide.
Of course. Thank you so much, Etim, for that really interesting talk. And I think you probably will have questions about how to bridge our communities and, think past this, I think, artificial divide between, academics and other people. Okay, excellent. Very good. Next, we have Tinashe Mushakavanhu. And if I'm saying your name incorrectly, please correct me. So Tinashe Mushakavanhu is a junior research fellow in African and Comparative Literature at St. Anne's College, University of Oxford. The central theme of his research is the role of literary culture in documentation, historical knowledge, and political power, and his work manifests in interdisciplinary modalities. His title for his presentation today is Metaphors and Metadata, Experimenting with Technologies of Repatriating Stories. Welcome, Tinashe. Oh, I can't hear you. Maybe others can.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, I can't see anything else, so I have no idea what I've done. But yeah, apologies for that. I am talking about, so my project is called Reading Zimbabwe, so that's what I'll be talking about. And just as an introduction, the project started in Brooklyn. So Brooklyn is not an obvious inspiration for an archival project about Zimbabwe. In a modest brownstone in Bed-Stuy, together with my collaborator, Nketia, we used to host what we called Sadza parties, inviting friends and strangers, a motley crowd of creatives, visual artists, photographers, writers, filmmakers, musicians, journalists, academics. There was no VIP to these gatherings. Everybody was equal, held together by words, music, and food. It was always an exceptional crowd of handpicked guests. There was no regularity, nor were the cast the same, but the occasions were memorable. Being part of a diaspora network meant that we were constantly talking about home, identity, history, politics, archives, food, family. This negotiation of the personal and the collective became the basis of the project that I want to talk about today. It's a project born out of a collaborative, collective, communal space. The digital became a portal to link back, but also to link into the future on our own terms. I became interested in working across time zones from different continents, countries, cities, and this all became part of the project. For most of the project life cycle, it was mainly self-funded. And also, briefly, we initiated a crowdfunding through Kickstarter, so inviting the community to collaborate with us. So the website to which I'll be referencing is a bit temperamental at the moment. It has been a struggle to sort it out, so I wanted to start from there. Since we are talking about digital projects and digital archives, this is a lesson that manifested after the project had been running for 5 years. What are the softwares and content management systems we use to design and program our work to build digital archives for African materials? How sustainable are they? Where are they hosted? And how do we maintain them for the future? So Reading Zimbabwe is a digital archive collecting metadata of books about Zimbabwe published in the last 60 years. The project has been collecting, cataloging, digitizing, and making available information about books from the 1950s to the present. The National Archive, this National Archive is now submerged and threatened with extinction. Many of the key books of Zimbabwe's literary canon, for example, are out of print. And most young people in Zimbabwe have no way of knowing they even exist. And so that's, and the project is kind of a global reading of Zimbabwe. So we're interested in the places that publish the most books about Zimbabwe, and sort of just trying to interfere with that system of knowledge production, circulation, distribution. I'll try to talk a little bit about that as I go along. So one of my favorite places, parts of the project, is the author index. We realized early in the project that most Zimbabwean writers, historians, academics are missing on the internet. So we started generating 50 word microbiographies. And so this part for me was always exciting for that reason, that I had to try and search who these people are. And I think this is important. So I'll give you, this is important in the context of Zimbabwe, because a lot of our national heroes are named after streets. So after independence in 1980, streets and buildings were renamed to reflect the new political reality. Colonial figures were replaced with the Black heroes. So pioneer settlers such as Jameson, Selu, Rhodes were dutifully replaced by a generation of Black freedom fighters like Chinamano, Chitepo, J.Z. Moyo, Silindika, and Tongogara. But these heroes are increasingly difficult to locate in the country's folds of history. Apart from being street names, their autobiographies, biographies, and memoirs remain unpublished or elusive. So that was like the starting point of the project, was to try and figure out historical biographies, autobiographies. And the website as it exists, it has 40 categories. All of them, I consider them to be points of curiosity. So who writes about food, sport, politics? Thinking of lists, we started thinking of lists as political statements. Reading Zimbabwe as a digital platform was established in late 2016, a year before the removal of Robert Mugabe, to think about and represent the country differently. So we avoided any editorializing or sharing our opinions. We focused on design. So thinking about color and, just like the symbolism, collecting, categorizing, arranging, ordering. Mugabe's hold on the Zimbabwean imagination for almost 4 decades necessitated the need to create a new set of questions, new practices, and methodologies. So as we were doing this work, we realized that the internet is not generous to African languages. So a lot of the books in Ndebele or Shona were missing on the internet. And so we started thinking about how do we archive gaps. So while we started with the idea to document metadata about books to learn the obsessions of how people were writing about our country globally, it became an exercise in mapping experiences beyond the grasp of our government. Okay, yeah, I wanted to talk about censorship, which is another thing that we have had to deal with in the context of Zimbabwe. So even in a seemingly innocent project, it could easily be read as a political project, but the idea of doing this work was to try and do what I call virtual repatriation, rescuing our national literatures from wholesale obscurity or systemic erasure. So the most interesting thing about these Shona and Ndebele books is that they are currently in basements and offsite storages in the US. So I can map cities in the US that have significant collections of this material that is not digitized. So you can't easily find even the metadata. So you can't find book covers, you can't find synopsis, like just basic information about these books. the other important part of the project is that it has more than 20 languages. So I also started thinking a lot about translation. You know, how are we read in other languages, and how do people translate us? So this is Petina Gapas and Elegy of Easterly, which was translated into Japanese. So the reason why I love particularly this example is that when you go to Harare, most of the public buses, the combis that we use for everyday transport are mostly imported from Japan. So they have Japanese scripts on the side, which are never removed. So it's a language. It has in a way become a Zimbabwean language that we only read visually. And when I was working on this project, I started thinking about trying to make these connections. So yeah, so the content, there's a lot of material. So in the back end of this project, there are a lot of data points. And what users can only access is pretty much the basics. So we try to upload like just a book cover, page numbers, a synopsis, a microbiography of the author. But in doing that work, we also started thinking about some of these literary figures from Zimbabwe, like Yvonne Vera and Marichera, and starting to build work around them, and also sort of smaller digital projects. So for example, with Marichera, I've been trying to do a crowdsourced biography of Marichera, and I created a micro website that is a WhatsApp number, so that people can be sharing anecdotes on Marichera that I'm going to collect and make a crowdsourced biography written through all these various contributions. I'm not going to disprove any anecdote. I think my job will just be to put everything together and the context of the project. So this is just something from Wikipedia. So during the COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns, I was finally able to do something I'd always wanted to do, but could not find time to do, which was to train how to input data on Wikipedia. This was a way to develop the microbiographies on our website into longer biographies. But I had not anticipated the challenges of trying to contribute on Wikipedia. A lot of the times the material on Zimbabwean writers, Zimbabwean artists was deleted because according to their notability index, all these people were not important despite their contributions. So it was, yeah, just an important thing to learn and try to expand the project outward and integrate it into the bigger internet ecosystem. But while the idea is to build digital work, I also think a lot about the offline experience of this work. What does it look like? There's also a part of me that refuses to give away everything to platforms and technologies that more often than not accumulate the data, lock us out, or force us to upgrade and spend thousands of dollars, essentially force us to buy back our data sets, which we create and collect from our communities. So South of Samora is a small zine literary publication that grew out of spending time building this digital project. So things I started learning, I started being interested in archives. So the behind the scenes, you know, what is the work that goes into the writing of books? So our project was simply to accumulate information about books, but then we suddenly realized the inequalities behind, you know, the publishing system. So we started making our own publications with our communities. So we did a lot of print workshops and publishing zines, books. We made films. We yeah, we also did exhibitions. So Beautiful Words Are Subversive was a traveling exhibition that traveled in a few cities in the US and then moved to Southern Africa, to South Africa and to Zimbabwe. And all of this work grew out of the digital project. So this is kind of the offline experience of the digital projects that I've been working on. So I think a lot about both experiences. For me, it's important to think with the offline, even though we are talking about the digital. You know, Zimbabwe, for example, is a highly informal society. The street still fulfills the same function as the internet. A place for party planning and public identity shaping, a place to go to seek an audience for whatever. The street is how trends spread. With only state media and control, trends rely on subcultures, gossip, and subversion. The street in Zimbabwe is alive in a way in which the internet, in my opinion, is still failing to be. The street is a place to be unique, rebellious, risky, enough to be a public register without actually placing young people in much danger. It makes them feel they're doing something, being seen, being different, and getting away with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tinashe, for this really wonderful presentation and for your insights on African language, politics, and of course, the precarity of the internet as well. So finally, of course, last but not least, we have Samba Camara from the University of North Carolina. I'll wait for you to stop sharing. Okay, very good. So Dr. Samba Camara is a teaching assistant professor of African, African-American, and diaspora studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He has published articles and book chapters on the influence of Islam on West African popular music and culture. His forthcoming monograph, A Muslim Afropolitanism, The Ethics of Personhood in Senegalese Popular Music, explores the ethics and aesthetics of grassroots community building in Senegal's Sufi-inflected music. Dr. Camara has recently led a major digitization project, funded by the British Library, in which he collaborated with his colleague, Dr. Mwanzandi, to collect and preserve over 6,000 pages of traditional Islamic manuscripts authored by 19th and 20th century Pulaar speaking scholars. At UNC Chapel Hill, Dr. Camara teaches courses on Muslim Black popular culture and African literature and performance. Welcome, Dr. Samba Camara. And his presentation is titled Pulaar Islamic Manuscripts and Their Audiences in Senegal and Mali, I see. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And I would like to thank Dr. Yaku and his team for inviting me to this fantastic symposium. And my talk today will be on this project that we have recently completed, which consisted of an effort to digitize Pulaar Islamic manuscripts in northern Senegal and parts of southwestern Mali. So as a researcher here at UNC, what I do in my work is really to seek to contribute a critical Black Muslim studies perspective in the study of African musical modernity in particular, but also in the study of Africa's cultural modernity in general. And this project is part of that effort. It was actually this effort to locate those African Islamic sources that have come to inform Muslim/Islamic identity and culture, especially post-colonial modernity. A few notes of acknowledgement. Really wanted to thank the British Library, their Endangered Archives program. This morning I heard a lot of talk about these fantastic archives, from my co-panelists, and I think there's a need to also seek support from these institutions to really help preserve these sources, these archives in continental Africa. EAP does that, and we benefited a great amount of from a great amount of support from the West Africa Research Center, which is based in Dakar, which is the capital of Senegal, and WARC is affiliated with the West African Research Association that is headquartered in Boston. So here at UNC, we benefited from a lot of support from the African Studies Center, as well as from my own home department, AAAD. So while I am the initiator and the principal grant writer, this project came to fruition with the help of a whole team, right? My co-principal investigator on my left-hand side, Dr. Momzandi, was not able to join this talk. So he traveled with me to Senegal, which is my home country, 3 times, right? He is a devoted member of the project runners. The next person that you see on the picture, that's Muntagaba, who is one of the 10 Islamic scholars that I had working with us, really to gather metadata that is needed to document the authors, the dating, the naming, right? The naming of places and etc. That were needed for an accurate documentation of the materials. And another crucial person is Carrie Bannon, who is a digitization specialist from UNC's library. She also traveled with us to Senegal twice, and one of the requirements of EAP is really to ensure knowledge transfer. And so we really made sure we had a specialist of digitization to travel with us so we could organize workshops in Senegal, which we did really to train our research assistants in the use of digitization technology. So the manuscripts that we gathered, they were held in these Pulaar speaking regions. So I tried to encircle the region here, which is this region that is sort of straddling southern Mauritania and parts of northern Senegal. And towards the bottom here in Mali, right, you see a smaller circle that shows Konyakari, which is this sort of an enclave of Pulaar-speaking community, which is the outcome of the 19th century migrations of the Pulaar-speaking people who had followed Al-Hajj Martal, who had founded the Islamic polity in that part of West Africa. And so to give you a bit of a background about the Pulaar people, they are a subgroup in this broader West African Fula ethno-linguistic group in Senegal and Mali, as I mentioned. And so they are among the first to be Islamized in Senegal and have had a long tradition of using Arabic to write Arabic manuscripts, but also of using Arabic to transcribe African languages, a form of writing that came to be known as Ajami in Africa and elsewhere. The manuscripts in our EAP 1245 digital repository, which is now housed in the website of the British Library, included manuscripts that were authored by Islamic scholars affiliated with the Tijaniya Muslim Brotherhood. This is one of the largest Muslim brotherhoods in Africa and in the world as well. So it's very transnational in nature, and the authors were mostly affiliated with it. And so we digitized up to over 6,000 pages of manuscripts. And that itself was the outcome of, was the result of several trips. Sometimes we could not travel due to, because we've had the grant since August 2018, right? We faced several travel restrictions due to COVID-19, which is why we had to delay a lot. So I will try to go a little faster and look into the collection.
Thank you, Samba. You have about 4 minutes left. Thank you.
So the project eventually produced 3 collections, or digitized 3 collections. The Madani Tal collection in Senegal and in Mali, and the collection of Muntaga Ba, as well as the collection of Omar C. So Muntaga Tal's, Chairman Madani Tal's collection yielded up to 2,949 folios, mostly written by Alhaji Omar Tal, and some of it consists of hand-copied manuscripts of originals written by Egyptian scholars. Muntaga Tal's collection, Muntaga Ba's collection contains 20 bound and unbound small books. This is where we found a few Pulaar Ajami works. The rest is predominantly in Arabic. There were also a lot of letters, of correspondences that were written by Muhammad al-Ghali Ba, who is the author of most of the collection, as well as in the correspondences, manuscripts that were written by his colleagues and friends. And so Muhammad al-Ghali Ba was formerly a part of the Mauritanian, he served as an ambassador in Mauritania, and his writings speak a lot to Mauritanian history, especially concerning Mauritanian policy about the Negro Africans in Mauritania. So in our attempt to really categorize this material, we focused on the medium of writing. The advent of Islam in Africa produced a culture, a cultural modernity. So you see these these learning wooden slates dating back to as early as the late 17th century in Senegal. And so the collections from Madani Tal were predominantly written with Daha, which is this ink, locally made ink, and that collection dates from the 1840s to the 1970s. And so moving forward, these are examples of the manuscripts, and to go a little faster, I will skip to the more recent portion of the collections. Here from the 1960s onward, most of the material we collected was written with pen, right? So here, denoting a move from Daha, not really to mean that people stopped using Daha, because they still do, but those who use Daha to compose writings on paper started using pen as an instrument of writing. I recently completed an article that examined this categorization and also its cultural significance. So these texts here, they are in Pulaar, right? These are popular songs that people sing. I myself grew up singing without knowing that these were really locally composed, and they have become a key component or a key source in forming Pulaar Muslim identity and Pulaar culture. And while we were in Futa, in Patagala, one of the libraries that we had visited, the Quranic students were singing, right, all the time. And so you see how this poetry really is part of their quotidian. And this poetry has made its way onto radio and TV shows in ways that really speak to how these Islamic manuscripts constitute a living heritage, a living culture in today's Pulaar-speaking West Africa. And to wrap up, right, the EAP 1245, which is the name of our project, was created principally by Umar Tal and his followers, all of whom are members of the Tijaniya Muslim Brotherhood. This digital repository is overwhelmingly more composed in Arabic than in Pulaar. And it covers Islamic science, exegesis of the Quran, Sufism or Islamic mysticism, documentary, panegyric poetry, and also other secular topics. One thing that we noticed, and I will end there, is that there is a lack of consensus in spelling. So in Senegal, for example, you will see that the way people use Arabic to compose Pulaar writings is significantly different, which makes reading very challenging, and which made it also necessary for us to rely on a diverse body of scholars to really come up with the metadata that we needed. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Samba, for this really stimulating presentation. Okay, great. So we have exactly 8 minutes because we do have to end on time. So I'd like to open up the floor for any questions that we may have for any of the panelists or the panel as a whole. You can write them in the chat or you can unmute and speak. Okay, so while we wait for questions, perhaps I will ask one to the entire group. And if you can speak quickly, what are your kind of future goals for this project in terms of longevity and also access? And what sort of hopes do you see sort of branching outside of, let's say, if you're in West Africa, thinking more broadly about the African continent and outside the sort of in-group who may have the original interest in your own work? So if anyone could respond from the panel.
Well, for the Nigerian Nostalgia Project, we see Nigeria as a test ground, if you like, or maybe a concept. And I think that our goal really is to continue to develop or to replicate whatever successes that we're able to achieve for the Nigerian public and for African audiences, you know, to be able to do that for other African countries, and particularly Afro-descended communities as well. I think that we have a responsibility to document, to record information for the benefit of people who are trying to reconnect and make sure that their connections to Africa make sense, if you like, from whatever experiences that they have documented across the world. And that is African American, Afro Latino, etc., Brazilian, whatever, Caribbean, etc., etc.
Thank you, Etim. Would anyone like to respond, or we have a new question in the chat?
Yeah, so for me, Ademide, which is a great question, by the way. This was a side project. That's what I call it, because I've recently been working on my first book, my monograph, which examines the influence of Islam on secular Senegalese popular music. But my ultimate goal is to produce a book that really provides an internal perspective on the cultural significance of these manuscripts, especially in understanding whatever today we can call African modernity, because historically the study of it has sort of just considered the Europhone libraries, neglecting really that there are African libraries that have been written in Arabic, using African in African languages, using the Arabic language, so to speak.
Great, thank you. Tinashe, I saw you come on the screen, but you've gone away again, or Judith. But I will read the two questions that we have 3 questions down in the chat. So we have about 4 minutes. So for Judith, can you elaborate on the final point you wanted to make during your reflections on the Global South when you ran out of time? Another question for the general panel. Can we really decolonize if some of the materials digitized by our funders determine the directions and own the copyrights to digitized materials? And finally, it strikes me that using social media makes it easier and more accessible to analyze future data via social media-based APIs. And I'm wondering if this is also factored in your work, and if you've seen anyone use social media-based aspects of your own project in this way. We probably can't hear from everyone, so I'd like to hear from Judith and Tinashe, and if people want to type in the chat their responses, because we do have to end in 3 minutes. So Tinashe, would you like to respond to any of these questions quickly?
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much. I think I'll just talk about copyright and all of that. Yeah, I think one of the things we learned early on in our project was that a lot of the archives, especially on literatures in Shona and Ndebele, were in the US and in Europe, and they were very difficult to access. They are not digitized, and the institutions that hold them are not interested. We're not interested to collaborate because, yeah, for various reasons, but part of it was also there's power in hiding these archives, investments, and yeah, just having a blab on the website that you own and control so much material. And I think that led to us becoming more creative in our own work. So either figuring out how to create our own archives and how to disturb those archives in much more creative ways.
Thank you, Tinashe. And Judith, you have about 2 minutes to respond also. Thank you.
Okay, so I think it's very clear that there's so much scarcity. There's an alarming scarcity of audiovisual heritage from the Global South, especially in the digital space. And why is it so? It's because a lot of the materials in our region are locked. The value of these materials are locked. So what do we do? I always am promoting like an archival activism amongst archivists, in our regions who are custodians of these materials. So we need to find ways of creating awareness about the value of the materials, because if the value is not, it's locked and it is not unlocked, how do we, get all these materials and all these heritage materials into the digital space? That is one. One other thing we need to do is to build capacity, amongst us. And by this, I know quite a number of you are academics. Academics really need to have, some kind of a solid relationship with archivists, because you rely on us for the materials, but if the relationship is not properly built, I mean, what do we do? And I think we are all aware that in a part of the world, archivists are not highly motivated, especially with regards to things that will keep them on the job. So we would like, I am just sending this plea to you to make sure that you make available, especially what do you say, funding opportunities for all these institutions that have all the materials that are locked, you know. And again, I always advocate for like technological independence. It's also another story, you know, but people, we need to be able to be technologically dependent. Again, I see other people taking, other institutions in the global north, taking advantage of the vulnerability, you know, of archives in the global south, coming with money to entice, oh, want to digitize and keep materials here and there and all these kinds of things. I think these are things we need to also look out for. I mean, as much as we are vulnerable to this, they shouldn't take advantage of us. And then I will call for regional funding institutions in the region so that all these archives can also, you know, in a way, tap from. And then knowledge sharing within institutions, you know. So all these people who have done stories, I will be who have done projects, especially on this panel, I will be very happy to reconnect, and then let's see how we can affect other institutions, you know, in our region. Thank you very much. I have a lot, but my time is.
Thank you so much, Judith. I think you've really ended us on a wonderful note. So I'd like to say a special thank you for all the panelists for their really exciting work, and I encourage everyone to connect with them. Thank you to the organizers and of course to the audience for participating. It's now time for the break. I believe it's 10 minutes, and we'll continue with the next panel. Thank you all so much.